I stood in the shadows of my parents' hallway, listening to my father hand over our family legacy to my brother. "She is out," he said, dismissing my entire existence with a wave of his hand. My mother just laughed and agreed. They thought they were cutting me out of the empire. I simply turned around, walked to my car, and logged into my offshore accounts. What they did not know was that I already owned the empire, and I was about to pull the plug on their entire reality. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family to protect your peace. Growing up in the affluent neighborhood of Buckhead in Atlanta meant maintaining an image of flawless Black excellence. My parents Calvin and Vivian treated our sprawling estate like a stage, and we were merely actors in their production. The crown jewel of our family was the Onyx Room. It was a historic high society supper club founded by my grandfather, a place where politicians, entertainers, and business moguls gathered. It was supposed to be our generational wealth. Tonight was supposed to be a normal Sunday dinner. The smell of roasted lamb and collard greens drifted through the house, masking the rot underneath our perfect family portrait. I had arrived early, stepping into the foyer just in time to hear voices echoing from my father's mahogany-paneled office. The door was cracked open just an inch. I stopped when I heard my name. "Zuri is just a PR fixer," my father Calvin said, his deep voice dripping with disdain. "She handles scandals for corporate suits. She does not understand Black legacy or what it takes to run a true empire. The paperwork is finalized. The Onyx Room is 100% yours, Jamal." I froze, my hand hovering over my expensive leather handbag. Jamal was my younger brother. At 32 years old, he was the undisputed golden child of the family. He possessed endless charm, but absolutely zero business acumen. He had bankrupted 2 startups and crashed 3 luxury cars, but in my parents' eyes, he could do no wrong simply because he was their son. My mother Vivian chimed in, her tone laced with her usual passive-aggressive poison. "Good. Zuri is too independent anyway. She is always working, always trying to prove something. Let her find a husband to fund her lifestyle. The club needs a man at the helm." Then came the sugary voice of Chloe, my brother's white wife. She had a habit of delivering racial and class microaggressions, disguised as compliments. "Honestly, it is for the best," Chloe said. "Zuri is so aggressive with her career. Jamal just has a more natural, polished way of dealing with the elite crowd. He understands the aesthetic we need." I stood in the dim hallway, letting their words wash over me. A younger version of myself might have burst into the room demanding an explanation, begging for the love and respect I had earned. I might have cried over the sheer injustice of being the scapegoat while the incompetent son was handed the keys to the kingdom. But at 35 years old, as one of the most ruthless crisis management executives in Atlanta, I did not shed a single tear. I just smiled, a cold, hard smile. My family was arrogant enough to believe they held all the power. They lived in a delusion funded by my silence. What none of them knew, not my father, not my mother, and certainly not my golden child brother, was that the Onyx Room had technically gone bankrupt 4 years ago. My father had made terrible investments, drained the operating accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle, and nearly lost the building to the bank. When the foreclosure notices arrived, he was too ashamed to tell his country club friends. Instead, he prayed for a miracle. I was that miracle, but I knew better than to hand Calvin a check. I knew he would just waste it and demand more. So, I used my legal team to create a blind, limited liability company called Vanguard Holdings. Through Vanguard, I quietly bought the debt, paid off the bank, and bailed out the club. For 4 years, my parents believed a hands-off angel investor from out of state had saved their legacy. They believed this silent investor was content to let them run the show, as long as the club remained a cultural staple. They thought they were spending a billionaire's money. They were actually spending mine. I was the invisible backbone holding up their entire reality. Without making a sound, I turned around and walked right back out the grand double doors of my parents' estate. The warm Georgia evening air felt remarkably clear. I walked down the curved driveway to my car, settling into the driver's seat. The leather felt cool against my skin. I did not start the engine right away. I opened my briefcase and pulled out my laptop, resting it on the steering wheel. If they wanted me out, they were going to get exactly what they asked for. I opened my encrypted banking portal and navigated to the Vanguard Holdings accounts. For years, I had maintained 2 emergency credit lines attached to the Onyx room. They were designed to automatically cover payroll and vendor costs when my father inevitably mismanaged the monthly budget. It was my way of keeping my grandfather's legacy afloat without feeding my father's ego. With a few precise keystrokes, I severed the connection. I canceled the emergency credit lines, shutting off the invisible life support system that had kept their illusion alive. Let them see what running an empire actually looks like when the safety net is gone. But as I was reviewing the recent transactions, something caught my eye, an anomaly in the personal credit monitoring system I kept for myself. I clicked on the alert and my blood ran cold. There was a new auto loan approved just 3 days ago. It was a massive 6-figure loan for a brand new Porsche. The exact same Porsche my brother Jamal had been bragging about acquiring on social media earlier that week. I leaned closer to the screen, tracing the details of the loan. The primary applicant was not Jamal. It was not my father either. The loan had been secured using my name, my pristine credit score, and my social security number. A wave of absolute disgust washed over me. My father had crossed the line from toxic favoritism into outright felony fraud. He had stolen my identity to finance a luxury toy for his golden child, all while sitting in his office plotting to cut me out of the family business. He assumed I would never notice, or perhaps he assumed that even if I did, I would stay quiet to protect the family name. That is the burden placed on Black women in families like mine. We are expected to endure the disrespect and absorb the financial abuse, all in the name of loyalty. Not anymore. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line to the fraud department of the issuing bank. The representative answered quickly, recognizing my premium account status. I kept my voice perfectly level, the same tone I used when dismantling a corporate scandal for my clients. "Yes, I need to report a highly fraudulent transaction," I said, staring at the illuminated facade of my parents' house through my windshield. An auto loan was recently opened using my social security number without my knowledge or consent. The vehicle is a new Porsche registered to a Jamal. I provided the exact details, confirming my identity and initiating the immediate cancellation of the loan. The bank representative assured me that since the loan was secured fraudulently, the asset would be marked for immediate repossession. The dealership and the authorities would be notified. I thanked the representative and ended the call. I closed my laptop, placing it back into my briefcase. I looked up at the glowing windows of the dining room where my family was likely sitting down to eat, laughing and celebrating Jamal's new status as the heir to the throne. They had no idea that the ground beneath them had just evaporated. They thought I was just a PR fixer. They were about to learn that my specialty was not just managing crises. It was orchestrating them for people who deserved it. I started my car, the engine purring smoothly in the quiet neighborhood. I drove away from the Buckhead estate, leaving behind the family that had just signed their own financial death warrant. They wanted a show, and I was going to give them a masterpiece. 2 days passed in total silence. I let the financial guillotine hang in the air, completely invisible to the people standing directly beneath it. Then came the text from my mother. A mandatory family dinner at Marcel, one of the most exclusive steakhouses in West Midtown Atlanta. Attendance was not requested. It was required. I knew exactly what this was. Whenever my father needed to establish dominance, he used a public arena with high-end steaks and white tablecloths, banking on the fact that we were too well-bred to make a scene in public. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a tailored emerald green suit that commanded attention the second I stepped out of my car. I took my seat at the reserved private table in the back. My parents arrived exactly on time. My father wore his signature tailored navy blazer, projecting the image of a seasoned patriarch. My mother carried a limited edition Birkin, her posture rigid with the exhausting effort of looking down on everyone else in the room. We exchanged stiff, polite pleasantries. They ordered martinis, I ordered sparkling water. We were just waiting for the guests of honor. 20 minutes later, Jamal and Chloe finally made their grand entrance. Through the large glass windows at the front of the restaurant, I watched Jamal toss the keys of his brand new fraudulently obtained Porsche to the valet. He swaggered into the dining room like he owned the city, wearing a designer watch that I knew for a fact was maxing out one of his hidden credit cards. Chloe walked 2 steps behind him, draped in a silk dress that screamed new money. They slid into the leather booth across from me. Chloe did not even bother to say hello before she started in with the performance. She leaned across the table, her blonde hair perfectly blown out, and gave me a smile so sweet it could cause a cavity. "Zuri, it is so brave of you to wear your hair natural to a place like this," Chloe said, her voice carrying just enough volume for the neighboring tables to hear. "Jamal and I just value a polished professional aesthetic so much, especially now that he is stepping into a larger role with the family legacy. We represent the brand, you know." I watched my mother take a slow sip of her martini, her silence an active endorsement of Chloe's disrespect. In my family, proximity to whiteness was treated as a currency, and Chloe wielded her privilege like a blunt instrument. A year ago, a comment like that would have made me shrink. I would have questioned my immaculate structured locks. I would have felt the sting of being the dark-skinned, natural-haired daughter who never quite fit their assimilationist mold. But tonight, I was bulletproof. I placed my water glass down on the crisp white linen and met her gaze perfectly. "Brave is an interesting word, Chloe," I said, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of emotion. "I call it effortless, but I completely understand your obsession with appearances. When your marketing firm has lost 3 major accounts in the last quarter, and your husband has to rely on my father to bail out his mistakes, a polished aesthetic is really the only asset you have left to offer." Chloe's mouth fell open. A patch of red crept up her neck, clashing violently with her expensive foundation. Jamal slammed his hand flat on the table, the ice in his water glass rattling. "Watch your mouth!" Zuri Jamal snapped. "Chloe is your sister-in-law. You will treat her with respect." "I treat people with exactly the amount of respect they can afford, Jamal," I replied, not breaking eye contact with him. "And right now, neither of you can afford much." My father cleared his throat loudly, slamming the menu down. "That is enough. We are not here to bicker like children. We are here to handle family business." He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. He slid it across the polished wood table until it hit my water glass. I looked down at the label. It read, "Family Restructuring Agreement." "I want to streamline the operations for the Onyx Room," my father said, using his best boardroom voice. "As you know, Jamal is taking over the day-to-day management. It is time we formalize the legacy. This document simply restructures the liability. It removes your name from the operational risks so you can focus on your little PR agency without worrying about the family burdens. It is a mere formality. Just sign the last page." He clicked a gold pen and held it out to me. I did not take the pen. Instead, I opened the folder. My father had always relied on the fact that black daughters are conditioned to be obedient to absorb the labor and the risk, while the sons receive the glory. He expected me to sign it blindly out of loyalty. I flipped past the first page and began reading the fine print. My legal team had trained me well. It took me less than 30 seconds to find the trap. The document was not removing me from liability. It was a guarantor agreement. It legally bound me to co-sign a massive commercial renovation loan for the Onyx Room, placing my personal assets, my PR firm, and my savings as collateral. Buried in the 5th section was a clause explicitly stripping me of any future equity or inheritance rights to the property. They wanted me to underwrite Jamal's complete takeover while legally erasing my existence from the family wealth. I closed the folder and pushed it slowly back across the table. "I do not sign things without my legal team reviewing them, Dad," I said. "And frankly, I am surprised you are trying to push a commercial loan through without consulting the primary investor. Doesn't the angel investor of the Onyx Room need to approve a massive restructuring of debt? My father scoffed, leaning back in his chair with supreme arrogance. That investor is a silent partner out in California somewhere. They only care about the quarterly returns. They do not understand the cultural nuances of running a black-owned establishment in Atlanta. I manage the investor. You just need to sign the paper so your brother can secure the renovation funds. You want me to collateralize my entire life so Jamal can play boss with someone else's money, I stated, laying the truth bare on the table. You are so selfish. My mother hissed, leaning forward. Your brother is building a future for his family. He needs this capital to elevate the club. You have no husband, no children, no legacy to maintain. You should be honored to support your brother. This is what families do. They build together. You do not want to build together, Mom? I replied softly. You want me to be the foundation so you can all walk all over me. The answer is no. I am not signing it. I am not co-signing Jamal's delusions, and I am not funding this charade for one more minute. My father's face contorted with rage. The charming patriarch vanished, replaced by the tyrant I had known my entire life. If you do not sign that paper, Zuri, you are cutting yourself out of this family. You will get nothing. You will be nothing to us. I already am nothing to you, Dad. That is why I am perfectly comfortable walking away. I stood up from the table, smoothing the front of my jacket. The waiter, sensing the extreme tension, nervously approached our table holding the leather billfold. My father snatched it from the waiter's hand. Separate checks, my father barked at the waiter. But put the wine on her tab, she ordered it. I had not ordered the wine. Jamal had ordered a $2,500 bottle of vintage Bordeaux the second he sat down. He had already drank 3 glasses of it. My father was trying to punish me, trying to flex his financial dominance by sticking me with a bill that would cripple a normal person. He wanted to watch me sweat. He wanted me to argue so he could call me broke and bitter. I reached into my purse, pulled out my solid metal black card, and dropped it onto the waiter's tray without breaking eye contact with my father. Take care of the entire table, I told the waiter. It seems the legacy is a bit strapped for cash tonight. Jamal's face flushed with deep humiliation. Chloe looked away, pretending to inspect her manicure. My mother glared at me with an intensity that could melt glass. I turned to walk away. Just as I took my first step, my phone vibrated violently in my pocket. It was a high-priority alert from the fraud management service tracking the stolen auto loan. I pulled my phone out and glanced at the screen. The message was crystal clear. The repossession order had been executed. The tracking device on the vehicle showed it was currently being loaded onto a tow truck. I looked over my shoulder, staring through the glass front of the restaurant, out into the valet lot. A massive flatbed tow truck was backing up to the curb, its yellow lights flashing rhythmically against the dark Atlanta night. The valet attendants were standing back watching as a repo agent hooked chains to the undercarriage of Jamal's pristine brand-new Porsche. I looked back at my brother, who was currently swirling the last drop of his $2,500 wine, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire world was about to be towed away. Enjoy the walk home, Jamal, I said. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the humid night air, leaving them sitting at the table completely unaware of the absolute devastation heading their way. I did not lose a single second of sleep that night. The next afternoon, I sat behind my glass desk at my PR firm, overlooking the Atlanta skyline, calmly reviewing a press release for a tech client. My phone vibrated violently against the sleek mahogany surface. The caller ID flashed my brother's name. I let it ring 4 times, allowing the tension to build, before I casually tapped answer and placed him on speakerphone. Zuri, you need to call the bank right now. Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with a high-pitched panic. I had never heard from him before. Tell them it is a system error. Give them a verbal authorization code or something. Fix this right now. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and picked up my pen. I could hear the distinct chaotic background noise through the phone. The sharp scrape of golf spikes on concrete, the murmurs of shocked men, and the unmistakable heavy hydraulic clanking of a commercial tow truck. He was at his exclusive Buckhead Country Club. He was standing right in front of the clubhouse doors, surrounded by federal judges, surgeons, and real estate moguls. "Why would I call my bank regarding a car I do not drive, Jamal?" I asked, my voice perfectly smooth and devoid of any urgency. "Because they are taking it," Jamal hissed, trying to keep his voice down but failing miserably. The repo guys bypassed the valet. They backed a flatbed right up to the main entrance. Everyone is watching Zuri. Chloe is inside, having lunch with the country club board members' wives. "You are embarrassing us. Call the authorization line." "Dad said this account was secured." "Dad committed identity theft," I replied, tracing the edge of my notepad with my pen. "You both used my social security number to secure a luxury vehicle to maintain an illusion of wealth you do not possess. You are incredibly lucky I only flagged the transaction as fraudulent with the bank instead of having the district attorney press felony charges." "Zuri, please," Jamal begged, his arrogant facade completely shattering. "You cannot do this to me. The guys from the investment group are standing right here watching my car get dragged onto a truck. Just authorize the payment and we will figure out the restructuring document later. We are family." "We are not family," I corrected him, keeping my tone ice cold. "I am just the crisis manager, remember. You and Dad made it very clear last night that I am out of the legacy. My finances are my own. Enjoy the walk home, Jamal." I disconnected the call and blocked his number. I felt absolutely nothing but the pure, clean air of liberation. 30 minutes later, my office line rang. It was my mother. I sent it straight to voicemail. Then my father called. Voicemail. They were finally realizing the money tap was officially welded shut. But in my family, retreating was never an option. If my mother, Vivian, could not control my wallet, she would immediately pivot to controlling my narrative. Reputation was her oxygen, and she was about to use it as a weapon to destroy mine. Fast forward to that evening. It was the annual Spelman College Alumni Gala hosted at the St. Regis Hotel. It was a pinnacle event for Black excellence in Atlanta. Generations of successful, brilliant Black women gathered in emerald green silk and diamonds to celebrate sisterhood and philanthropy. I am a proud alumna and a major independent donor. I stepped into the grand ballroom expecting the usual warm embraces and high society networking. I wore a tailored crimson gown, my head held high, my natural hair styled flawlessly. But the moment I walked past the champagne tower, I felt the shift in the room. The atmosphere grew thick. Conversations halted as I approached small groups, only to resume in hushed, frantic whispers the second my back was turned. I saw the sideways glances. I felt the collective weight of pity and judgment settling over my shoulders. I walked over to the silent auction tables, keeping my composure absolute. An older, highly influential socialite named Mrs. Caldwell approached me. She had been a longtime friend of my mother and a pillar in the Atlanta philanthropic scene. She reached out and placed a heavily jeweled hand on my arm, offering me a look of deep, theatrical sympathy. "Zuri, darling," Mrs. Caldwell murmured, leaning in close so her perfume assaulted my senses. "We are all just praying for you. I told your mother this afternoon that mental health is nothing to be ashamed of. We support you." I did not flinch, though my blood turned to liquid nitrogen. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell," I said, keeping a pleasant, polite smile on my face. "But I assure you my mental health is perfectly intact. Did my mother mention something specific?" Mrs. Caldwell lowered her voice, adopting a conspiratorial tone. "Oh, sweetheart, you do not have to hide it. Vivian spent the entire afternoon calling the alumni board. She was just devastated. She told us how your PR firm is hemorrhaging money and how the stress caused you to have a complete breakdown. She said you have become so bitterly jealous of Jamal and Chloe's perfect marriage that you started lashing out at family dinners." I stared at her, letting the sheer audacity of my mother's betrayal sink in. "Vivian said they had to cut you off financially because you were draining their retirement accounts to keep your failing business afloat." Mrs. Caldwell continued, shaking her head. It takes a strong mother to practice tough love like that. But do not worry, Zuri. We will not let this affect your standing in the Alumni Association. We know you are just going through a dark time. My mother was executing a preemptive strike. She knew the news of Jamal's very public repossession at the country club would spread through Atlanta's elite circles by tomorrow morning. To protect her golden child and her white daughter-in-law from the humiliation of being broke, she was projecting their financial ruin onto me. She was actively painting me as the jealous, unstable, and bankrupt scapegoat, so that when the truth about the car came out, everyone would assume I maliciously set them up out of spite. It was a brilliant, vicious strategy. A weaker woman would have run to the bathroom in tears. A less disciplined woman would have started screaming, defending her business, and shouting the truth about the identity theft to anyone who would listen. But I was a crisis manager. You do not beat a high society smear campaign with tears, and you certainly do not beat it by acting erratic and proving their point. You beat a smear campaign with indisputable receipts. I gently removed Mrs. Caldwell's hand from my arm. I appreciate your prayers, Mrs. Caldwell, I said, my voice radiating absolute unbothered confidence. But I highly suggest you hold on to them for Vivian. She is going to need them much more than I will by the end of the week. Enjoy the gala. I excused myself and walked smoothly toward the terrace, ordering a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. I stepped out into the cool night air, pulling my phone from my clutch. If they wanted to play dirty, I was going to change the rules of the entire game. I opened my email app to check in with my legal team. Instead, the first notification I saw was an urgent message flagged by my company's internal server. It was an email thread forwarded to me by one of my firm's junior associates. I opened it and read the contents. It was an email from Chloe. My sister-in-law was not just sitting at home comforting her husband over his lost Porsche. She was actively capitalizing on the rumors my mother had just planted across the city. Chloe had directly emailed the CEO of my biggest PR client, the largest real estate development firm in Georgia. She was using her own mediocre marketing agency to pitch a hostile takeover of my contract. In the email, Chloe explicitly referenced my mother's lies. She wrote that she knew my firm was experiencing internal financial instability, and that she wanted to offer her highly polished and professional services to ensure the client's brand did not suffer during my personal family crisis. She was trying to steal my primary source of income to secure a quick cash retainer and bail Jamal out of the financial hole I had just left them in. I took a slow sip of my water, looking out over the glittering lights of the Atlanta skyline. They had tried to steal my credit. They had tried to steal my reputation. Now the white woman my brother married was trying to use my mother's lies to steal the business I built with my own two hands. They really thought I was going to roll over and take the beating. I tapped the screen and forwarded Chloe's email to my attorney, Elijah, along with a single sentence. It is time to burn the ships. The next morning, the air in my office felt electric with purpose. Chloe's email was a masterpiece of corporate backstabbing wrapped in fake feminist concern. She had reached out to Maxine, a titan in Atlanta commercial real estate, and my firm's most lucrative client, under the guise of an introductory networking coffee. In the second paragraph, Chloe casually dropped the poison my mother had manufactured. Chloe wrote that she understood my firm was undergoing severe internal financial restructuring due to my declining mental health. She offered her own boutique marketing agency as a safe, stable alternative to ensure Maxine's upcoming multi-million-dollar development launch did not suffer from my personal family crisis. It was a bold move for someone whose primary business experience consisted of spending her husband's money. Chloe fundamentally misunderstood how power worked among Black women in this city. She assumed Maxine would view me as a liability. Instead, Maxine had immediately forwarded the pitch to my private inbox with a single line of text reading, "Look at the audacity of this little girl." I replied to Maxine and invited her to an early lunch at a highly exclusive French bistro in Midtown. I knew for a fact that Chloe treated this particular bistro as her personal social climbing headquarters. She practically lived there on Thursdays, sipping rosé and trying to insert herself into conversations with Atlanta's old money crowd. To ensure the trap was set, I had my assistant leak the reservation details to a mutual contact who fed information directly to Chloe. When Maxine and I arrived, the host seated us at a prime corner table. I ordered a sparkling water and kept my posture perfectly relaxed. Maxine and I were halfway through discussing the marketing rollout for her new luxury high-rise when the inevitable happened. Chloe spotted us. I watched her through the reflection of the mirrored wall across the dining room. She practically vibrated with excitement. She smoothed down her overpriced pastel dress, adjusted her designer bag, and marched over to our table, projecting absolute manufactured delight. Zuri, my goodness, what a coincidence, Chloe sang out. Her voice pitched just loud enough to draw the attention of the surrounding tables. She placed a manicured hand on the back of the empty chair next to me. I had no idea you were taking meetings today. Your mother told us you were taking some much-needed time off to focus on your wellness. She turned her bright, predatory smile toward my client. And you must be Maxine. I am Chloe, Jamal's wife, Zuri's sister-in-law. I am such an admirer of your development projects. I actually sent your office an email yesterday about synergy opportunities. Maxine, a woman who had spent 30 years destroying mediocre men in boardrooms, looked at Chloe the way one looks at a mosquito. She did not offer her hand. She simply took a slow sip of her iced tea. Chloe took the lack of outright rejection as an invitation. She pulled out the empty chair and sat down uninvited. I hope you do not mind if I just say a quick hello? Chloe continued, leaning forward and adopting a tone of deep, artificial sympathy. I was just telling Maxine in my email how much we value her brand. My agency specializes in clean, polished aesthetics. We provide a level of stability that I know is so crucial for your upcoming launch, especially during unpredictable times. She looked at me with fake pity. We are all just rooting for you to get better, Zuri. We really are. I did not raise my voice. I did not glare. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a sleek black folder. I placed it squarely in the middle of the table. Stability is a fascinating word choice, Chloe. I said, my voice entirely conversational. Because when I review a potential vendor for my clients, I look very closely at their historical stability. I opened the folder. Inside was a meticulously compiled dossier. I slid the first document toward Maxine, but kept my eyes locked on my sister-in-law. This is the financial summary of Chloe's first lifestyle brand, I explained smoothly. It filed for bankruptcy 24 months after inception, leaving several local minority-owned vendors unpaid. The second document is the corporate filing for her event planning business, which was dissolved due to gross mismanagement of client funds. Her current agency has a staff of 2 people and has lost its only 3 major accounts in the last 90 days. Chloe's smile vanished. Her face drained of color. Where did you get that? Where did... she hissed, dropping the sweet facade entirely. I turned the page in the folder. But financial incompetence is not the real liability here, I continued. The real liability is brand safety. Maxine, as a black woman developing properties in historically black neighborhoods, you cannot afford to have your marketing handled by someone with a documented history of cultural hostility. I slid a stack of high-resolution printed screenshots across the table. They were social media posts from Chloe's sorority days and her early 20s. Posts she thought she had successfully scrubbed from the internet years ago. They were filled with deeply offensive complaints about affirmative action, racist jokes about gentrifying urban neighborhoods, and mocking stereotypes of black women. My crisis management team was exceptionally good at recovering deleted digital footprints. Maxine picked up the screenshots. She read the first page, and her expression hardened into absolute ice. She dropped the papers back onto the table as if they were contaminated. You emailed my office asking to handle the public relations for a $90 million development project. Maxine said, her voice dangerously low. You tried to use my relationship with Zuri to bypass our vetting process. You do not have an agency. You have a liability. If you ever contact my office or my staff again, I will have my legal team draft a harassment suit so fast your head will spin." Chloe looked frantically from Maxine to me. She realized instantly that the cash grab was gone. She was not going to secure a retainer to save Jamal's lifestyle. She had been utterly exposed. And so she deployed the only weapon she had left. Chloe's eyes welled with tears. Her bottom lip began to tremble. Within seconds she was crying loudly, her shoulders shaking, drawing the stares of every affluent patron in the restaurant. "You are bullying me!" Chloe sobbed, her voice echoing off the bistro walls. "You have always hated me, Zuri. You are trying to destroy my life because you are jealous of me and Jamal. I was just trying to help your business, and you are attacking me in public." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing dramatically, waiting for someone in the restaurant to rush to the aid of a distressed, crying white woman being confronted by two black women. It was a dangerous historical dynamic she was actively trying to weaponize against me. I did not flinch. I did not try to comfort her or lower my voice to appease the staring crowd. I signaled our waiter, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. "Check, please," I said, handing him my card. I looked at Chloe, who was currently peering through her fingers to see if her performance was working. "You cannot weaponize your tears here, Chloe," I said, my tone absolute zero. "Crying does not erase your incompetence, and it certainly does not erase your racism. You wanted to play corporate espionage, but you lack the basic intelligence required for the game. Now you can go back to my brother and explain why you failed to secure the money he desperately needs to pay off his repossessed car." I signed the receipt, left a generous tip, and stood up. Maxine stood up beside me, completely ignoring the weeping woman at the table. We walked out of the restaurant together, our heads held high, leaving Chloe sobbing alone at a table surrounded by her own documented failures. The afternoon sun felt incredibly warm as I walked Maxine to her waiting car. She thanked me for the lunch and the transparency, assuring me our contract was secured for the next 5 years. After her driver pulled away, I walked toward my own vehicle. My heels clicked rhythmically against the pavement, matching the steady heartbeat of a woman who had just reclaimed her territory. As I unlocked my car door, my phone chimed with a secure encrypted notification. It was an email from Elijah, my corporate attorney. I sat in the driver's seat and opened the message. There was no greeting, just a single PDF attachment and a brief sentence. "The notice has been served." I opened the attachment. It was an official legal document from Vanguard Holdings, a 14-day notice of default addressed directly to my father Calvin and the operating board of the Onyx Room. It explicitly stated that the club was in gross violation of its financial covenants. All principal and interest payments were accelerated and due immediately. Failure to comply would result in complete foreclosure and seizure of the property, the liquor license, and all associated branding. The silent angel investor had finally spoken. The grace period was officially over. My parents and my brother had 14 days to produce millions of dollars they did not have, or they would lose the only legacy they cared about. I placed my phone in the cup holder and started the engine. The real panic was about to begin. The real panic began exactly 47 minutes later. My phone screen lit up with my father's caller ID. I let it ring 3 times before pressing accept. His voice did not have the booming, authoritative resonance he usually commanded in boardrooms and at dinner tables. He sounded breathless, frantic, and completely unmoored. "Zuri," he gasped over the line. "You need to get down to the Onyx Room right now. Cancel your afternoon meetings. Drop whatever you are doing. This is a level 1 family emergency." I did not ask what was wrong. I did not feign concern or ask if someone was in the hospital. I simply told him I was on my way and ended the call. I merged onto Peachtree Road, feeling a profound sense of absolute calm. For my entire life, my father had dictated the emotional weather of our family. If he was angry, we all had to be quiet. If he was celebrating, we all had to applaud. Today he was terrified, and I was the one controlling the storm. I pulled into the private rear parking lot of the Onyx Room. Walking through the heavy brass service doors, I felt the familiar weight of my grandfather's history. The club was steeped in Black Atlanta excellence. The walls were lined with dark polished mahogany and framed black and white photographs of jazz legends, civil rights leaders, and mayors who had dined in these very booths. The air always held the faint, sophisticated scent of aged leather and expensive bourbon. My grandfather had built this sanctuary with his bare hands during a time when men who looked like him were not even allowed to own property in this zip code. My father had inherited a masterpiece and treated it like an ATM. My brother was treating it like a personal playground. I found them all gathered in the private executive dining room on the second floor. The contrast between the elegant surroundings and their sheer disheveled panic was striking. My father was pacing the length of the Persian rug, sweating completely through his custom-tailored dress shirt. His tie was pulled loose, and he was muttering to himself. Jamal was slumped in a velvet chair, staring blankly at the floor. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire identity get towed away on a flatbed truck, which was exactly what had happened. Chloe sat as far away from me as possible, aggressively scrolling on her phone with her arms crossed, defensive and sulking from her humiliating defeat at the bistro. My mother Vivian stood by the wet bar, pouring herself a very large glass of dark liquor. Her usual perfectly composed high society facade was cracking around the edges. I took a seat at the head of the heavy oak conference table, crossing my legs and placing my leather tote bag on the floor. "What is the emergency?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. My father stopped pacing and slammed a crumpled stack of papers onto the table right in front of me. It was the 14-day notice of default from Vanguard Holdings. I recognized the premium legal stationery my attorney Elijah used. "The silent investor is pulling out," my father practically shouted, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "They just issued a notice of default. They are calling in the entire principal of the commercial loan and accelerating all the interest. They are threatening to foreclose on the building and seize the liquor license in 14 days. I picked up the papers, pretending to read through the legal jargon I had personally approved an hour ago. "That is unfortunate," I said, setting the papers back down, "but I am confused. Just 2 nights ago at the steakhouse, you explicitly told me the angel investor was a hands-off partner out in California. You said they only cared about quarterly returns and that you managed them perfectly. It sounds like you severely mismanaged them." My father slammed his hands on the back of a chair. "They are ruthless predators, Zuri. They are trying to steal our family legacy right out from under us on a technicality." "A technicality," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I am looking at the default clauses right here. It says the operating accounts have been drained and the minimum liquidity covenants have been completely violated for 6 consecutive months. That is not a technicality, Dad. That is insolvency. Where did the operating capital go?" Jamal suddenly jumped up from his chair, pointing a finger at me. "Do not come in here and start pointing fingers, Zuri. You do not know anything about running a hospitality venue. The economy is in the gutter. Inflation is driving up food costs. The demographics in Buckhead are shifting and people are just not spending money on premium bottle service anymore. It is a transitional quarter. Every major club is feeling the squeeze right now." I looked at my brother, letting a beat of silence stretch between us until he nervously lowered his hand. "The economy did not force you to buy a 6-figure luxury sports car, Jamal," I said, my tone dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Inflation did not force you to wear a solid gold watch that costs more than the monthly payroll for the kitchen staff. And shifting demographics certainly did not drain the business accounts to fund Chloe's fake boutique marketing agency. You have been treating this club like your personal piggy bank, and now the bill is due." Chloe gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "How dare you accuse us of stealing? Jamal is the face of this brand. He has to maintain a certain lifestyle to attract high-net-worth clients. You are just jealous because you sit behind a desk all day while he is out building relationships." "Building relationships," I countered, locking eyes with her. "You mean like the relationship you tried to build with my biggest client 3 hours ago before you ran out of the restaurant crying? How did that work out for your polished aesthetic, Chloe?" She turned bright red and snapped her mouth shut, sinking back into her chair. Jamal looked at her in confusion, but did not have the energy to ask what I meant. My mother slammed her glass down on the wet bar, the sharp clink silencing the room. She marched over to the table, her eyes flashing with desperate authority. "Stop it," she commanded, glaring at me. "Stop attacking your brother. We did not call you here to audit the family. We called you here to fix this. You are a crisis manager, Zuri. You handle public relations nightmares for billionaires and politicians every single day. Call this investor. Find out who they are and use your media contacts to threaten them with bad press. Tell them we will drag their name through the mud if they try to foreclose on a historic Black-owned business. Mom, a public relations firm, cannot stop a legal foreclosure initiated by a private equity group," I explained, speaking slowly as if addressing a toddler. "You are in breach of contract. No amount of press releases will magically replace the missing capital Jamal squandered. The only thing that stops a default notice is a certified check." "Then write the check," my mother demanded, stepping right up to the edge of the table. The room went dead silent. Even my father stopped breathing for a second. I looked up at the woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was inadequate, and I waited for her to realize how insane she sounded. She did not. "Write the check," she repeated, her voice trembling with entitlement. "You have that successful agency, you have investment portfolios and a fully funded retirement account. Cash out your 401k. Take out a second mortgage on your townhouse. Do whatever you have to do to bridge this financial gap until Jamal can get the new renovation loan approved." I stared at her, letting the sheer audacity of her demand wash over me. 2 nights ago, she told me I was selfish. She told me I had no husband, no children, and no legacy. She sat at a table and watched my father try to trick me into signing away my rights. Now that their golden child was drowning, she expected me to serve as his financial life raft. "This is your brother," she continued, her voice rising in pitch, attempting to weaponize guilt. "This is his future. He is trying to build a family with Chloe. You do not have dependents, Zuri. You only have to worry about yourself. You need to step up and be a team player for once in your life. This club is our bloodline." I looked away from her frantic face and let my gaze wander around the room. I looked at the heavy velvet drapes, the custom brass fixtures, and the polished wood floors. I thought about the sweat and blood my grandfather poured into this foundation. I thought about the 4 years I had spent secretly working 80-hour weeks, funneling my own hard-earned money through an anonymous company just to keep these doors open so my family could retain their pride. They had taken my sacrifice and used it to fund their arrogance. I slowly stood up from the table. I picked up my leather tote bag and slid the strap over my shoulder. I looked at the historic velvet booths of my grandfather's club, tracing the intricate stitching with my eyes. Then I looked dead at my mother. "I am not spending a single dime to save a ship." The captain intentionally sank. The silence that followed my words was so thick it could choke a person. My father stood perfectly still for 3 agonizing seconds before his face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. The polished Atlanta business mogul vanished. In his place stood a desperate, arrogant man losing his grip on his favorite punching bag. He slammed both his fists onto the heavy oak conference table with enough force to rattle the crystal glasses on the wet bar. "How dare you speak to me that way in my own building?" he roared. "After everything I have done to provide for you, after I gave you the very name that allows you to walk into those corporate boardrooms and demand top dollar. You think you are better than us because you hoard your little paychecks while your brother actually puts his boots on the ground to build a legacy." He was rewriting history in real time. He was completely ignoring the fact that his boots-on-the-ground son had just bankrupted them and had his luxury sports car repossessed on a golf course. My father pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, deploying the ultimate weapon narcissistic parents use when they lose financial control over their children. "If you walk out that door and refuse to help this family today, you are done." He spat, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "Do you hear me, Zuri? You are completely done. You will not be welcome at Thanksgiving dinner. You will not show your face at the family reunion in Hilton Head this summer. I will strike your name from the family trust. You are a bitter, lonely woman who hates seeing her brother thrive, and I will not have that toxic energy poisoning my legacy." I looked at my mother, expecting her to intervene. Vivian simply turned her head away, staring blankly at the wall, choosing her golden son over her daughter, just as she had done every single day of my 35 years on this earth. Jamal sat back in his chair, a smug, satisfied smile creeping onto his face. He thought our father had just put me in my place. He thought the threat of isolation would break me and force me to open my checkbook. I slowly reached down and picked up my leather tote bag. I stood up to my full height and calmly smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer. I felt no urge to cry. I felt no heartbreak. I only felt a massive, suffocating weight lifting off my chest. For decades, I had paid the emotional and financial rent to stay in a family that treated me like a utility closet. Today, my lease was officially up. "You are right, Dad," I said, my voice steady and crystalline in the quiet room. "I am out." I turned my back on them and walked out of the executive dining room. I did not slam the door. I did not look back. I walked down the grand sweeping staircase of the onyx room, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood. I looked at the vintage chandeliers and the velvet booths, knowing exactly what was coming next. I pushed through the heavy brass service doors and stepped out into the humid Atlanta afternoon. The heat hit me instantly, but the air tasted sweet. I was halfway to my car when I heard the sharp, frantic clicking of designer heels on the pavement behind me. "Zuri, wait." I stopped and turned around. Chloe was jogging toward me across the private parking lot. Her fake sweet facade was completely gone. The country club wife persona had melted away, revealing the opportunistic parasite underneath. She stopped a few feet away from me, crossing her arms over her chest with a triumphant smirk. "You really think you won in there, do you not?" Chloe sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "You think walking away and refusing to write a check is going to stop Jamal and your father from saving this club? You think you just taught us a lesson?" I simply stared at her, letting her dig her own grave. "You are so naive," Zuri, Chloe continued, taking a step closer. "It does not matter if you refuse to empty your 401k. Calvin already has 3 meetings lined up tomorrow with private commercial lenders in Buckhead. And do you know what he is going to use as his primary character reference? Your public relations firm. He is going to walk into those banks and leverage your name, your client list, and your corporate reputation to guarantee the new renovation loan. He is telling all the underwriters that your agency is officially partnering with the Onyx Room for the relaunch." Chloe laughed, a sharp, grating sound. "Your name is tied to this family whether you like it or not. He will just leverage your reputation to get the cash Jamal needs. You cannot stop him. You are going to fund my husband's lifestyle one way or another, Zuri. So go ahead and drive away. We do not need your permission to use your success." She stood there waiting for me to explode. She wanted me to scream at her so she could run back inside and tell my father I was acting aggressive and unhinged. She wanted the satisfaction of knowing she had trapped me into funding their delusions by proxy. I looked at her pale, smug face and felt a profound sense of pity for her sheer stupidity. She had absolutely no idea who she was dealing with or what was about to happen to her. "Good luck with those bank meetings, Chloe," I said, my tone completely flat. I turned around, opened my car door, and slid into the driver's seat. I pressed the ignition button and locked the doors, leaving Chloe standing alone on the hot asphalt. She glared at me through the tinted glass, looking confused by my absolute lack of panic. I pulled my phone from my purse and navigated to my contacts. I dialed my corporate attorney, Elijah. He answered on the first ring. "Tell me we are a go," Elijah said, his voice sharp and ready. I looked in my rearview mirror, watching Chloe march back toward the service doors of the club to go comfort her broke husband and my delusional father. They thought they could use my name to secure more debt. They thought they could steal my reputation to save the ship they were currently sinking. "Execute the hostile takeover," I commanded, my voice unwavering. "Freeze all operating accounts immediately." The financial asphyxiation of a multi-million-dollar business does not happen in slow motion. When you cut the main artery, it bleeds out in a matter of hours. By Tuesday morning, the reality of the Vanguard Holdings asset freeze hit the Onyx Room like a freight train. I sat at my pristine desk at my public relations firm, sipping a freshly brewed espresso, and watched the collapse unfold entirely through the frantic digital alerts pinging on my secondary monitor. In the Atlanta hospitality industry, reputation is currency, but cash is oxygen. The Onyx Room relied heavily on premium liquor distributors who operated on strict net 30 terms. For the past 4 years, my automated blind credit line had quietly covered those invoices, ensuring the club always had an endless supply of top-tier cognac and champagne for the city elite. When Elijah executed my order, those automated payments bounced hard. My industry contacts started texting me before noon. They told me that 3 separate delivery trucks from the largest beverage distributors in Georgia had literally backed up to the loading dock of the Onyx Room, scanned their rejected payment terminals, and drove away without unloading a single case. By Wednesday afternoon, the situation deteriorated from an inventory crisis to a full-blown mutiny. The bi-weekly payroll for the kitchen staff, the bartenders, and the security team bounced. The group chats among Atlanta service industry workers are notoriously fast and unforgiving. Within hours, word spread that my father Calvin was dodging his own employees, locking himself inside his mahogany office, while the executive chef threatened to walk out entirely. My phone began filling up with unhinged voicemails from my father. He was no longer the arrogant patriarch threatening to strike my name from the family trust. He sounded like a cornered animal screaming into the receiver about banking errors and demanding I use my corporate connections to bully the distributors into releasing their shipments. I deleted every single voicemail without listening to the end. With his Porsche repossessed and his pockets completely empty, my brother Jamal was backed into a corner. He could not afford to look broke. In his mind, image was the only thing keeping his crumbling marriage to Chloe intact. So he did what financially illiterate men always do when they are drowning. He doubled down on a bad hand. I received a phone call from a trusted associate who handles security for several high-profile venues in the West End. He informed me that Jamal had bypassed traditional banks entirely. My father had already tried and failed to secure a commercial loan that morning because every legitimate underwriter in Buckhead demanded my signature as a guarantor. Without my name backing the paper, Calvin was laughed out of the lobby. Desperate for liquid cash, Jamal walked into the office of a notorious predatory hard money lender. He took out an exorbitant short-term street loan carrying an astronomical interest rate, using the club future weekend door covers and VIP section minimums as collateral. He was mortgaging the future of a building he did not even legally own yet. To generate the massive influx of cash needed to pay back the loan shark and keep the staff from quitting, Jamal announced a massive relaunch VIP party for Friday night. He plastered the event across every social media platform, billing it as the official changing of the guard for the Onyx Room. It was a classic smoke and mirrors tactic. He planned to pack the building with Atlanta influencers, athletes, and politicians, charge double for the entry fee, and force high minimum spends at the tables. He was going to use the street loan to buy cheap liquor, funnel it into premium bottles, and pray the crowd was too busy taking pictures to notice the downgrade in quality. He was risking my grandfather's historic legacy for a quick cash grab to save his own ego. On Thursday afternoon, I drove to Buckhead to meet with my corporate attorney Elijah. His office was a masterclass in modern minimalism, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I sat down at his massive glass conference table. Spread across the surface were dozens of thick financial binders and forensic accounting ledgers. When Vanguard Holdings initiated the freeze, it gave Elijah legal authority to audit the club's internal operating accounts. I thought I knew the depths of my family betrayal. I thought their mistreatment of me was simply a matter of toxic favoritism and blinding arrogance. But as I opened the first ledger and traced the columns of numbers, my blood turned to glacial ice. It was not just gross incompetence, it was systemic malicious theft. Calvin had not just failed at hospitality management. He had actively embezzled the capital I secretly provided. I traced dozens of wire transfers moving directly from the Vanguard operating account, the money I bled from my own savings to keep my grandfather's dream alive, straight into my mother's personal checking account. 6 figures had been deliberately diverted over a span of 2 years. While Vivian was standing in ballrooms telling Atlanta high society that I was financially unstable and deeply jealous of my brother, she was funding her luxury lifestyle with my money. I found the exact receipts for her first-class trips to Monaco, her extensive cosmetic procedures, and her custom designer wardrobes. The very woman who demanded I empty my retirement account to save my brother had been quietly draining my assets to finance her own vanity. But the ultimate insult, the one that made me close the ledger and take a deep stabilizing breath, was the consulting fees. Buried in the vendor payouts were monthly recurring retainers paid to a boutique marketing agency. Chloe Agency. My father had been siphoning my money to pay his white daughter-in-law an exorbitant monthly fee for absolutely no tangible services. He was subsidizing her failing business with the capital I provided. They took the money of the dark-skinned, natural-haired daughter they constantly mocked and handed it directly to the woman who weaponized her privilege against me at every family dinner. They funded her arrogance with my sacrifice. The sheer audacity of the theft was breathtaking. They did not just view me as a workhorse. They viewed me as a resource to be mined and discarded without a second thought. They felt entirely entitled to the fruits of my labor while actively denying me a seat at the table. Elijah watched me process the depth of the betrayal. He did not offer any useless words of comfort or hollow pity. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew I did not need sympathy. I needed ammunition. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of heavy documents printed on premium legal stock. The pages were finalized, stamped, and heavily embossed by the city courts. He slid them slowly across the glass desk until they rested right in front of me. I looked down at the documents. It was the absolute, undisputed transfer of power, the property deed to the historic building, the corporate transfer of the city liquor license, the complete ownership rights to the Onyx Room brand and trademark. And resting right on top were 3 formal commercial eviction notices drafted and signed by a judge. "It is done," Elijah said, his voice low and razor-sharp. "The audit is complete and the default is legally binding. You own the building, you own the license, and you own the brand. They have absolutely zero legal standing to operate on the premises." I picked up the eviction notices, feeling the heavy weight of the paper between my fingers. This was not just a legal victory. This was the reclamation of my dignity. This was the definitive end of 35 years of emotional subjugation. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the landlord. "When do we drop the hammer?" Elijah asked, leaning back in his chair and folding his hands. I looked out the window at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. I thought about Jamal pouring cheap liquor into expensive bottles. I thought about Chloe bragging to her country club friends about her new marketing contracts. I thought about Vivian swiping a credit card funded by my sweat, and Calvin standing on a stage pretending he built an empire he actually destroyed. They wanted a spectacular relaunch. They wanted the entire city to watch them step into their new era of wealth and power. I was more than happy to give them an audience. Friday night, I said, a slow, dark smile spreading across my face, at the VIP relaunch. Friday night hit the upscale neighborhood of Buckhead with the kind of humid electric energy that made people want to spend money they did not actually have. I sat in the plush leather seat of a blacked-out luxury SUV, idling just down the street from my grandfather's historic supper club. Through the dark tinted windows, I watched the grand spectacle my brother had orchestrated. The line of desperate patrons wrapped entirely around the block. Women in shivering designer dresses and men in expensive tailored jackets stood behind red velvet ropes, waiting for a chance to be seen inside the most exclusive event in the city. Valet drivers sprinted back and forth across the illuminated pavement, aggressively parking sports cars and high-end sedans. From the outside, it was a flawless, breathtaking illusion of extreme wealth and untouchable status. But I knew the absolute truth behind the flashing lights. I knew the valet company had demanded their payment up front in crisp cash because Jamal had bounced a massive check to them on Wednesday. I knew the premium bottles of champagne being carried out to the patio by waitstaff holding sparklers were likely purchased with the last remaining dollars of that predatory, high-interest street loan my brother took out. I knew the entire operation was a fragile house of cards, waiting for the slightest breeze to knock it flat into the dirt. I turned my attention to the specialized team assembled in the vehicle with me. My corporate attorney Elijah sat to my left, impeccably dressed in a dark charcoal suit. He rested his hands on a heavy leather briefcase that contained the absolute legal destruction of my family's fraudulent empire. In the third row of the SUV sat two senior corporate auditors from one of the most ruthless accounting firms in Atlanta. They carried their own briefcases filled with forensic financial ledgers and frozen account notices. And flanking our vehicle in a secondary unmarked car were three off-duty local law enforcement officers I had hired through a premium private security firm. They were not dressed for a high society party. They wore dark tactical suits equipped with communication earpieces and the quiet, intimidating confidence of men who enforce the law for a living. They were strictly here to execute a court-mandated corporate seizure. I checked my reflection in the darkened window. I was not wearing a sparkling cocktail dress or a flowing evening gown. I wore a tailored ivory power suit cut so razor-sharp it could draw blood. My natural hair was pulled back into a flawless structural updo, highlighting the sharp angles of my cheekbones. I wore minimal jewelry, just a vintage gold watch that belonged to my grandfather. I looked exactly like what I was at that very moment, a landlord arriving to collect a massive outstanding debt. "It is time," I said, my voice perfectly steady in the quiet cabin of the vehicle. Elijah nodded and tapped the partition, signaling our driver. The SUV rolled smoothly forward, bypassing the massive line of waiting patrons and pulling directly up to the VIP entrance. The heavy rhythmic bass of the music vibrated through the pavement and rattled the soles of my shoes as I stepped out into the warm night air. My security detail immediately moved into formation, flanking me and the legal team as we approached the front doors. The head bouncer, a towering man named Kevin, stepped in front of the red velvet rope, crossing his massive arms. My father had hired him recently, but I had secretly kept his entire security team on payroll through Vanguard Holdings. Kevin looked at me, took in the tailored ivory suit, then looked at the three uniformed officers standing shoulder to shoulder behind me. I gave him a very subtle, knowing nod. Kevin did not say a single word. He unclipped the brass hook of the velvet rope and stepped aside, completely opening the path for my takeover. We walked through the heavy double doors, and the full sensory assault of the club hit me immediately. It was packed wall to wall with the absolute elite of Atlanta. I saw local politicians, reality television stars, and prominent real estate moguls sipping cocktails in the ambient lighting. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, roasted garlic, and high-end bourbon. Right in the center of the elevated VIP section, holding court like a king on a throne, was my brother. Jamal wore a custom velvet tuxedo jacket, laughing loudly and pouring drinks for a table full of local social media influencers. He was playing the benevolent millionaire, casually throwing around cash, and completely oblivious to the legal firing squad walking right through his front doors. Across the crowded room, I spotted my sister-in-law. Chloe was completely in her element, playing the ultimate high society hostess. She wore a sparkling silver gown, weaving gracefully through the packed dance floor, and snapping her fingers at the waitstaff with an infuriating sense of unearned entitlement. I watched her chat up the wife of a prominent city councilman, leaning in close and laughing. She was desperately trying to secure marketing contracts for her failing boutique agency by using my grandfather's club as her personal networking playground. It took her exactly 40 seconds to spot my arrival. I watched the fake charming smile freeze completely on her face. Her eyes darted from my striking ivory suit to Elijah, and then landed directly on the three armed tactical officers walking in tight formation behind me. The color instantly drained from her cheeks, but her profound arrogance quickly kicked in to override her panic. She abruptly excused herself from the councilman's wife and marched purposefully across the crowded floor, heading straight toward my team. She intercepted us right near the edge of the main bar, physically attempting to block my path. She crossed her arms tightly, making her silver bracelets clink together. "Zuri," she hissed, keeping her voice low and tight so the nearby wealthy guests would not hear her panic. "You have a massive amount of nerve showing up here tonight. Jamal specifically took you off the VIP guest list this morning. You are not welcome at this relaunch." She looked me up and down, taking in my severe business attire with a visible sneer of disgust. "And showing up to a luxury event in a boardroom suit with these strange men is just embarrassing. We are trying to elevate the brand tonight. You need to turn around and leave right now before I have you publicly escorted out in front of all these important people." I did not blink. I did not frown. I did not even make direct eye contact with her. I looked right past her shoulder, scanning the layout of the massive room, mapping out my direct path to the stage. Chloe realized I was completely ignoring her authority. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. "Security," she yelled, raising a manicured hand to flag down two of the massive club bouncers stationed near the bar. "Remove this woman and her guests immediately. They are trespassing on private property." The two club bouncers started walking toward us, their expressions aggressive and ready for a physical altercation. But they never even made it within 5 feet of me. My private security team simply stepped forward smoothly, cutting off their approach. One of the off-duty tactical officers flashed his official badge and firmly tapped the thick stack of court-ordered eviction documents in his left hand. The club bouncers took one look at the heavy official county seals, recognized the tactical officers, and immediately backed away, holding their hands up in the air in total surrender. They knew much better than to interfere with a state-mandated corporate seizure. I finally lowered my gaze and looked directly at Chloe. She was standing completely frozen, her arms still raised in the air, staring at her retreating bouncers in absolute open-mouthed shock. She could not comprehend why the men she paid were refusing to follow her orders. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. It was a sharp cracking sound that seemed to cut right through the heavy bass of the music. My security detail smoothly stepped around her, parting the sea of wealthy dancing patrons like water. I walked right past her, my shoulder, brushing lightly against the fabric of her silver gown. I did not say a single word to her. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead, my posture perfect, my intention absolute. I was heading straight for the illuminated DJ booth towering over the dance floor. The air in Buckhead on a Friday night is always thick with humidity and the desperate scent of new money trying to prove itself. I sat in the plush leather seat of a blacked-out luxury SUV, idling just down the street from my grandfather's historic supper club. Through the dark-tinted windows, I watched the grand spectacle my brother had orchestrated to save his ego. The line of patrons wrapped entirely around the block. Women in shivering designer dresses and men in expensive tailored jackets stood behind red velvet ropes, waiting for a chance to be seen inside the most exclusive event in the city. Valet drivers sprinted back and forth across the illuminated pavement, aggressively parking sports cars and high-end sedans. From the outside, it was a flawless, breathtaking illusion of extreme wealth and untouchable status. But I knew the absolute truth behind the flashing lights. I knew the valet company had demanded their payment up front in crisp cash because Jamal had bounced a massive check to them on Wednesday. I knew the premium bottles of champagne being carried out to the patio by waitstaff holding sparklers were purchased with the last remaining dollars of a predatory high-interest street loan. I knew the entire operation was a fragile house of cards waiting for the slightest breeze to knock it flat into the dirt. I turned my attention to the specialized team assembled in the vehicle with me. My corporate attorney Elijah sat to my left, impeccably dressed in a dark charcoal suit. He rested his hands on a heavy leather briefcase that contained the absolute legal destruction of my family's fraudulent empire. In the third row of the SUV sat two senior corporate auditors from one of the most ruthless accounting firms in Atlanta. They carried their own briefcases filled with forensic financial ledgers and frozen account notices. Flanking our vehicle in a secondary unmarked car were three off-duty local law enforcement officers I had hired through a premium private security firm. They were not dressed for a high society party. They wore dark tactical suits equipped with communication earpieces and the quiet, intimidating confidence of men who enforce the law for a living. They were strictly here to execute a court-mandated corporate seizure. I checked my reflection in the darkened window. I was not wearing a sparkling cocktail dress or a flowing evening gown. I wore a tailored ivory power suit cut so razor-sharp it commanded the space around me. My natural hair was pulled back into a flawless structural updo, highlighting the sharp angles of my cheekbones. I wore minimal jewelry, just a vintage gold watch that belonged to my grandfather. I looked exactly like what I was at that very moment, which was a landlord arriving to collect a massive outstanding debt. "It is time," I said, my voice perfectly steady in the quiet cabin of the vehicle. Elijah nodded and tapped the partition, signaling our driver. The SUV rolled smoothly forward, bypassing the massive line of waiting patrons and pulling directly up to the VIP entrance. The heavy, rhythmic bass of the music vibrated through the pavement and rattled the soles of my shoes as I stepped out into the warm night air. My security detail immediately moved into formation, flanking me and the legal team as we approached the front doors. The head bouncer, a towering man named Kevin, stepped in front of the red velvet rope, crossing his massive arms. My father had hired him recently, but I had secretly kept his entire security team on my own payroll through Vanguard Holdings. Kevin looked at me, took in the tailored ivory suit, then looked at the three uniformed officers standing shoulder to shoulder behind me. I gave him a very subtle, knowing nod. Kevin did not say a single word. He unclipped the brass hook of the velvet rope and stepped aside, completely opening the path for my takeover. We walked through the heavy double doors, and the full sensory assault of the club hit me immediately. It was packed wall to wall with the absolute elite of Atlanta. I saw local politicians, reality television stars, and prominent real estate moguls sipping cocktails in the ambient lighting. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume-roasted garlic and high-end bourbon. Right in the center of the elevated VIP section, holding court like a king on a throne, was my brother. Jamal wore a custom velvet tuxedo jacket, laughing loudly and pouring drinks for a table full of local social media influencers. He was playing the benevolent millionaire, casually throwing around cash and completely oblivious to the legal firing squad walking right through his front doors. Across the crowded room, I spotted my sister-in-law. Chloe was completely in her element, playing the ultimate high society hostess. She wore a sparkling silver gown, weaving gracefully through the packed dance floor and snapping her fingers at the waitstaff with an infuriating sense of unearned entitlement. I watched her chat up the wife of a prominent city councilman, leaning in close and laughing. She was desperately trying to secure marketing contracts for her failing boutique agency by using my grandfather's club as her personal networking playground. It took her exactly 40 seconds to spot my arrival. I watched the fake charming smile freeze completely on her face. Her eyes darted from my striking ivory suit to Elijah and then landed directly on the three armed tactical officers walking in tight formation behind me. The color instantly drained from her cheeks, but her profound arrogance quickly kicked in to override her panic. She abruptly excused herself from the councilman's wife and marched purposefully across the crowded floor, heading straight toward my team. She intercepted us right near the edge of the main bar, physically attempting to block my path. She crossed her arms tightly, making her silver bracelets clink together. "Zuri," she hissed, keeping her voice low and tight, so the nearby wealthy guests would not hear her panic. "You have a massive amount of nerve showing up here tonight. Jamal specifically took you off the VIP guest list this morning. You are not welcome at this relaunch." She looked me up and down, taking in my severe business attire with a visible sneer of disgust. "And showing up to a luxury event in a boardroom suit with these strange men is just embarrassing. We are trying to elevate the brand tonight. You need to turn around and leave right now before I have you publicly escorted out in front of all these important people." I did not blink. I did not frown. I did not even make direct eye contact with her. I looked right past her shoulder, scanning the layout of the massive room, mapping out my direct path to the stage. Chloe realized I was completely ignoring her authority. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. "Security!" she yelled, raising a manicured hand to flag down two of the massive club bouncers stationed near the bar. "Remove this woman and her guests immediately. They are trespassing on private property." The two club bouncers started walking toward us, their expressions aggressive and ready for a physical altercation. But they never even made it within 5 feet of me. My private security team simply stepped forward smoothly, cutting off their approach. One of the off-duty tactical officers flashed his official badge and firmly tapped the thick stack of court-ordered eviction documents in his left hand. The club bouncers took one look at the heavy official county seals, recognized the tactical officers, and immediately backed away, holding their hands up in the air in total surrender. They knew much better than to interfere with a state-mandated corporate seizure. I finally lowered my gaze and looked directly at Chloe. She was standing completely frozen, her arms still raised in the air, staring at her retreating bouncers in absolute open-mouthed shock. She could not comprehend why the men she paid were refusing to follow her orders. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. It was a sharp cracking sound that seemed to cut right through the heavy bass of the music. My security detail smoothly stepped around her, parting the sea of wealthy dancing patrons like water. I walked right past her, my shoulder brushing lightly against the fabric of her silver gown. I did not say a single word to her. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead, my posture perfect, my intention absolute. I was heading straight for the illuminated DJ booth towering over the dance floor. The DJ booth at the Onyx Room sits elevated above the main floor, like a modern pulpit designed for the sole purpose of commanding the room. I walked toward it with measured, deliberate steps. The air was thick with the metallic scent of stage fog and anticipation. The resident DJ, a young guy Jamal had likely hired for his social media following, rather than his actual mixing skills, looked down and saw my team approaching. He took one look at the severe expression on my face, and the 3 tactical officers flanking me, and he physically stepped back from his equipment. I did not even have to ask him to move. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender and slid past the turntables, giving me total access to the control board. I stepped up into the booth. I looked at the massive array of glowing buttons and sliders. I reached out, found the master volume channel, and pulled the fader straight down to 0. The music died instantly. The sudden violent silence in a room packed with hundreds of people was absolutely deafening. Without the heavy bass masking the noise, the club was suddenly filled with the awkward sounds of clinking glasses, stumbling high heels, and confused murmurs. The flashing strobe lights above the dance floor stopped rotating, casting harsh shadows across the room. It took exactly 4 seconds for the confusion to morph into collective shock. Hundreds of heads snapped toward the elevated booth, staring up at me. I stood there, illuminated by the booth monitors, looking down at the very people my family had invited to celebrate my supposed downfall. I scanned the sea of faces and found my targets. Calvin was standing near the main bar holding a snifter of premium bourbon. I watched the realization hit him. His arrogant, untouchable patriarch facade completely shattered in real time. He slammed his glass down on the marble counter, spilling amber liquid everywhere, and immediately began shoving his way through the dense crowd. He shoved past a local city councilman and a prominent real estate broker, his eyes locked on me with manic fury. Jamal was right on his heels, his custom velvet tuxedo jacket looking absolutely ridiculous as he scrambled to keep up with our father. They rushed the 3 steps leading up to the DJ booth, but my security detail immediately closed ranks, forming a solid human wall. Calvin had to stop at the bottom step, his face flushed a dangerous deep purple. He looked up at me, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He leaned in close to the tactical officers, trying to project his voice up to me without alerting the entire club to his panic. "What in the world do you think you are doing?" Calvin hissed, his voice trembling with sheer venom. "Have you completely lost your mind? You are ruining our reputation in front of the entire city. Get down from that stage right now, before I have you arrested for criminal trespassing. Jamal tried to push past one of the corporate auditors, pointing a shaking finger at me. You are just bitter because I cut you off the guest list. Jamal spat, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. You are throwing a tantrum because Chloe exposed your failing business. You need to leave Zuri. You are embarrassing yourself and you are ruining my launch party. I looked down at them, feeling absolutely no fear, no guilt, and no hesitation. They were men who had relied on financial intimidation and emotional manipulation their entire lives, but they had absolutely no power here. I did not raise my voice to argue with them. I did not flinch at their threats of police intervention. I simply turned my head slightly to the left and gave a subtle nod. Elijah, my corporate attorney, moved forward with the smooth, lethal grace of a predator who had cornered his prey. He stepped around the security officers and walked down one step, bringing himself eye to eye with my father. Calvin tried to puff out his chest, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate the lawyer, but Elijah did not even blink. He calmly reached into his heavy leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. The papers were bound with brass fasteners and heavily stamped with the unmistakable blue ink of the county superior court. Calvin stared at the papers, refusing to raise his hands to take them. He knew deep down that whatever was in that stack was going to destroy him. Elijah did not wait for my father to accept the delivery. He gently but firmly pressed the thick stack of documents directly against Calvin's chest, forcing my father to instinctively bring his arms up to grab them before they fell to the floor. Calvin Elijah said, his voice carrying the calm, absolute authority of the law. Consider yourself officially served. My father looked down at the documents in his hands. He saw the Vanguard Holdings logo printed boldly across the top page. He saw the eviction notice. He saw the acceleration of debt clause. His hands began to shake so violently, the heavy parchment paper rattled in his grip. Jamal peered over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the bold legal print. Jamal's mouth fell open as the reality of their financial ruin finally crystallized. They were not just facing a temporary cash flow problem, they were facing total annihilation. The crowd was watching this entire exchange with bated breath. The wealthy patrons of Atlanta high society knew they were witnessing a monumental collapse, but they needed the context. They needed the final piece of the puzzle to understand exactly why the daughter of the house was serving her own father with eviction papers in the middle of a crowded club. I reached out and grabbed the silver microphone resting on the DJ console. I flicked the power switch. A sharp, high-pitched squeal of feedback echoed through the massive overhead speakers, making several people in the front row wince and cover their ears. I held the microphone to my lips, looking out over the silent, expectant crowd. And then I looked directly down at the man who had told me I was out of his family just a few weeks ago. "Dad," I said, my voice booming through the club's state-of-the-art sound system, crystal clear and completely unwavering. "A few weeks ago, you sat at a dinner table and told me that the silent investor of this club was a hands-off partner. You said they were out in California and only cared about the quarterly returns. You told everyone that you managed the investor perfectly while you drained the accounts." I paused, letting the silence stretch out, making sure every single person in the room was hanging on my next word. I looked at Jamal, who was staring at me in pure, unadulterated horror. "You were wrong." I did not wait for my father to process the words. I raised my left hand and gave a sharp two-finger signal to the audio-visual control booth located on the mezzanine level. The resident lighting technician had been replaced an hour ago by one of my own corporate media specialists. Instantly, the massive custom LED screens wrapping around the stage and the dance floor went entirely black. The ambient club visuals, the swirling gold graphics, and Jamal's custom branding vanished. A second later, the screens flared back to life, illuminating the dark club with the stark, glaring white background of official legal paperwork. I had them project the highly classified corporate ownership records of Vanguard Holdings across 50-foot digital displays. The documents were magnified so massively that every single person in the VIP section, every politician, every real estate broker, and every socialite could read the fine print perfectly. My voice resonated through the premium sound system, cold and unyielding. 4 years ago, my father quietly bankrupted this historic establishment. He drained the operating accounts and defaulted on the primary commercial mortgages. The Onyx Room was 72 hours away from being seized by the bank and sold off for parts. To save his pride and his reputation, he prayed for a silent investor to bail him out. He thought a wealthy stranger from California swept in and cleared the ledgers. I stepped closer to the edge of the DJ booth, looking directly down at my father, whose face was currently illuminated by the glow of the digital documents behind me. There is no stranger in California, Dad. I am Vanguard Holdings. I am the sole managing member of the limited liability company that bought your debt. I am the angel investor who paid off your catastrophic financial mistakes. I own the physical building. I own the land it sits on. I own the master liquor license. And I own the exclusive trademark to the Onyx Room brand. The absolute shockwave that ripped through the club was palpable. A collective gasp echoed from the dance floor. Hundreds of cell phones were raised in the air, recording every second of this unprecedented high society execution. The flash of phone cameras reflected off the crystal chandeliers. I shifted my gaze to my mother. Vivian was standing near the edge of the stage, her designer clutch pressed hard against her chest. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide with a terrifying realization. She reached out with a trembling hand and grabbed my father's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric of his tuxedo jacket. The woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was a bitter, lonely failure who needed a husband to survive was currently staring at a daughter who possessed a net worth she could not even begin to fathom. She was calculating the sheer volume of wealth I had been hiding from her all these years. Then I looked at my brother. Jamal was physically swaying on his feet. The golden child, the supposed heir to the Atlanta hospitality throne, looked like a deflated balloon. His jaw hung open, completely slack. He stared up at the massive LED screens, reading my name listed as the sole proprietor of the empire he had been bragging about owning all night. The velvet tuxedo jacket he wore suddenly looked like a cheap Halloween costume. He had spent the last month strutting around the city, taking out predatory street loans, and making promises he could never keep, all based on an inheritance that never actually belonged to him. But the most satisfying reaction belonged to Chloe. My white sister-in-law was standing a few feet away from Jamal, completely paralyzed. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. I watched the rapid, terrifying mathematics happening in her eyes. Just a few hours ago, she had attempted to steal my largest public relations client, claiming I was mentally and financially unstable. 2 days ago, she had mocked my natural hair and my lack of a polished aesthetic at an exclusive steakhouse. Now she was standing in the middle of a multi-million-dollar venue, realizing that the black woman she had been treating with passive-aggressive racial contempt was actually a corporate titan. She realized that I had enough liquid capital to buy and sell her entire existence 10 times over. The sheer magnitude of my hidden wealth completely shattered her entire worldview and her false sense of superiority. My father, however, was a creature of absolute delusion. He had spent 60 years controlling the narrative, and he was not going to let reality destroy his reputation without a fight. He forced a loud, booming laugh that sounded painfully unnatural in the tense silence of the club. He turned around to face the crowd of staring patrons, spreading his arms wide in a theatrical gesture. "Give it up for my daughter, everyone!" Calvin yelled, his voice straining to project over the murmuring crowd. She always did have a flair for the dramatic. "This is just a little family prank to kick off the relaunch party. A little guerrilla marketing stunt cooked up by her public relations firm. It is a joke, folks. We are keeping you entertained." He turned back to the DJ booth, the fake smile remaining plastered on his face while his eyes burned with pure homicidal rage. He stepped up onto the first stair of the booth, maintaining the facade for the cameras, but dropping his voice to a vicious whisper. "Turn off those screens right now, Zuri. You have had your little moment of revenge. Now cut the microphones and tell your security to step down before you do permanent damage to our brand. We can discuss this in my office like adults, but you will not humiliate me in front of the mayor and the city council. Jamal suddenly snapped out of his shock. Panic and humiliation twisted his features into something ugly and aggressive. He realized that his friends, his influencers, and the loan sharks he owed money to were all watching him get publicly stripped of his power. He lunged forward, bypassing our father and rushing up the stairs toward the DJ booth. "Give me that microphone," Zuri Jamal shouted, reaching his arm out to snatch the equipment from my hand. "You are not doing this to me tonight. This is my club." I did not flinch, and I certainly did not retreat. I simply stepped smoothly out of his reach, pivoting on my heel with effortless precision. Before Jamal could take another step forward, my private tactical officers moved seamlessly into his path. Two solid walls of armed security blocked his advance, crossing their arms and staring him down with cold, professional authority. Jamal hit the human barrier and bounced back, stumbling down a step. I raised the microphone back to my lips, my voice echoing with devastating finality. "This is not a prank, Jamal, it is an eviction." Jamal stood frozen on the stairs of the DJ booth. The word eviction hung in the heavy club air, dropping the temperature in the room to freezing. He looked back at the massive screens, expecting the legal documents to disappear. Instead, I raised my hand and signaled the control booth for the second phase of my presentation. The deed and ownership papers vanished. In their place, a series of highly detailed financial spreadsheets illuminated the dark room. The documents were bank statements, wire transfer logs, and cleared checks, all bearing my father's signature. I tapped the microphone again. The high society crowd leaned in closer, their collective silence creating a vacuum of absolute attention. "I am a crisis manager by trade," I said, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "I fix broken things. When I quietly bought the debt of this club 4 years ago, I assumed the financial bleeding was due to poor management and changing demographics. I assumed my father simply did not know how to adapt to the modern Atlanta hospitality market. But corporate audits do not lie. I directed everyone's attention to the highlighted columns on the screen behind me. Over the past 24 months, my father Calvin did not just mismanage the club operating accounts. He actively embezzled $750,000 of my money. A collective gasp rippled through the VIP section. I watched my father visibly shrink, his broad shoulders collapsing as the numerical proof of his theft was broadcast to the entire city. I continued, speaking, my tone analytical and utterly devoid of pity. He siphoned those funds directly from the club payroll and vendor accounts. He then funneled that money through a series of shell companies to fund a very specific lifestyle. I clicked a button on a remote I had brought with me. The screen shifted to display the receiving accounts. Nearly $500,000 of that stolen money was paid as monthly consulting retainers to a boutique marketing agency. The crowd followed the red laser pointer on the screen, reading the name of the business. It was Chloe's firm. I looked directly at my sister-in-law. Chloe was shaking her hands, covering her mouth in sheer horror. "You spent the last 3 years making jokes about my natural hair and my lack of a polished aesthetic, Chloe," I said, ensuring the microphone picked up every syllable. "You pitched my biggest client yesterday, claiming I was financially unstable. Yet your entire designer wardrobe, your luxury vacations, and your failing business were entirely subsidized by my bank account. My father took the money of the dark-skinned daughter he constantly mocked and handed it directly to you, so you could play the role of a wealthy socialite. You are not a marketing genius, Chloe. You are a highly paid charity case." The facade of the perfect, affluent family shattered into a million pieces right there on the dance floor. The Atlanta elite are notoriously ruthless when it comes to fake wealth. I watched prominent real estate developers and city politicians pull out their phones, recording the screens and whispering furiously to one another. The social execution was absolute. My father had spent decades curating an image of untouchable black excellence. In less than 5 minutes, I had exposed him as a common thief who stole from his own daughter to fund his white daughter-in-law's delusions of grandeur. He would never secure a business meeting in this city again. Jamal finally broke. The arrogance that had fueled his entire existence evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, terrified man-child. He realized that the luxury sports car he lost that afternoon was just the beginning. He had no money, no career, and now no club to hide behind. He scrambled up the final step of the DJ booth, stopping just inches from my tactical security detail. "Zuri, please stop," he begged, his voice cracking loudly over the ambient noise of the crowd. "Turn the screens off. You are destroying everything. We are blood, Zuri. We are siblings. This is our legacy. You cannot do this to your own brother." I looked down at his pleading face, feeling absolutely nothing. "You did not care about our blood when you sat at a steakhouse 2 nights ago and tried to trick me into co-signing your fraudulent loans," I replied, keeping my voice steady and amplified. "You did not care about being siblings when you laughed while Dad told me I was out of the family. You only care about legacy now because your pockets are empty and your credit cards are maxed out. You are a 32-year-old man, Jamal. It is time you learn how to pay your own bills." Jamal fell to his knees on the carpeted steps of the booth, burying his face in his hands. The golden child was completely broken. That was when my mother realized she had lost control of the narrative. Vivian could not bully me, and she could not shame me. The socialite friends she had lied to earlier that week were currently standing in the crowd watching her entire life unravel. She needed a new strategy. She needed to be the ultimate victim. Vivian pushed past my defeated father and marched to the base of the DJ booth. Tears were streaming down her perfectly contoured face. They were real tears, but they were not for me. They were for her dying social status. She looked up at me, her voice trembling with intense, weaponized maternal agony. "How can you do this to your own family, Zuri?" She cried out loud enough for the front row to hear. "Have you no heart? We gave you life." Vivian stood at the base of the DJ booth, staring up at me with tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. They were real tears, but they were not shed for me. They were mourning tears for her dying social status and her evaporating access to my bank accounts. She gripped the brass railing of the booth, trying to project the image of a heartbroken matriarch to the hundreds of affluent witnesses recording our every move. "How can you do this to your own family, Zuri?" She cried out, her voice trembling with intense, weaponized maternal agony. "Have you no heart? We gave you life." Her words hung in the humid air of the club, dripping with the ultimate toxic guilt trip that narcissistic parents deploy when they are finally cornered. I looked down at the woman who had birthed me, feeling a profound glacial emptiness where a daughter's love should have resided. I did not reach out to comfort her. I did not lower my voice to spare her feelings. I did not shrink under the weight of her manufactured sorrow. I leaned directly into the microphone. "You did not give me life." I said every single syllable, striking like a steel gavel in the dead silent room. "You gave me an invoice. You charged me for my existence every single day, demanding I pay my dues in absolute obedience, in silence, and in hard cash, just so you could fund a lavish lifestyle you never actually earned. You used my ambition to subsidize your arrogance, and tonight I just paid that invoice in full. Your account is permanently closed." Vivian recoiled as if she had been physically struck across the jaw. She staggered back a step, looking frantically to my father for backup. But Calvin was entirely hollowed out. I turned my attention directly to him. He was still clutching the thick stack of eviction papers against his chest, his knuckles stark white from the tension. The great imposing patriarch who had terrorized boardrooms and bullied his children for 60 years had absolutely nothing left to say. His custom-tailored tuxedo suddenly looked baggy and ill-fitting on his deflated frame. Last Sunday I said, making sure the entire VIP section could hear the absolute finality in my tone. "I stood in the darkened hallway of your house. I heard you transfer the last of this club's supposed equity to your golden child. I heard you laugh at my career and dismiss my entire existence. And I heard you tell Jamal she is out." I paused, letting his own cruel words hang in the air directly above him. I watched his eyes widen as he realized I had known about his betrayal from the very beginning. He realized that every single move I made this week was a calculated execution. "You were right, Dad. I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. I am out. I am entirely out of this toxic parasitic family. But you are out of my building. Calvin's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. He looked around the VIP section, desperately seeking an ally among his wealthy peers. He found none. The prominent real estate developers and city politicians he had golfed with for decades actively turned their backs on him, sipping their premium bourbon and refusing to make eye contact. Atlanta high society is brutally unforgiving to thieves who get caught, and they offer zero protection to men who steal from their own daughters. I gave a sharp, definitive nod to the tactical security officers flanking me. The lead officer stepped forward smoothly, placing a firm, unyielding hand on my father's shoulder. "Time to go, sir," the officer said, his voice brokering absolutely zero negotiation. Jamal tried to jerk his arm away from the second tactical officer, puffing out his chest in a desperate, pathetic display of misplaced machismo. "Get your hands off me, I am the owner," Jamal shouted, but his voice cracked, betraying his absolute terror. The officer simply applied a fraction more pressure to Jamal's arm, instantly neutralizing the threat, and steering him forcefully toward the main staircase. Chloe was actively weeping now, abandoning any pretense of high society grace. She held her expensive silver clutch over her face, trying to shield herself from the blinding flashes of hundreds of cell phone cameras. The reality of her situation had crashed down on her. Her proximity to black wealth was a complete mirage. The luxury lifestyle she thought she married into was funded entirely by the black woman she had spent years subjecting to racial microaggressions. Now she was being publicly marched out of a multi-million-dollar venue as a confirmed fraud. The walk of shame across the expansive dance floor felt beautifully cinematic. My private security detail escorted Calvin, Vivian, Jamal, and Chloe through the parted sea of staring guests. The club's regular bouncers, the massive men Jamal had commanded just 20 minutes ago, stood rigidly by the exits, perfectly content to watch the fraudulent management team get tossed into the street. They knew exactly who owned the liquor license and who signed their paychecks now. The heavy double doors of the Onyx room swung wide open. The humid night air rushed into the lobby as my tactical team pushed my former family out onto the pavement. The doors swung shut, locking with a heavy, satisfying metallic thud. I stood in the elevated DJ booth and watched the immediate vicious aftermath unfold through the massive front glass windows of the club. The unified front they had maintained against me for my entire life instantly dissolved the second they hit the sidewalk. Chloe did not reach out to comfort her husband. She spun around on her high designer heels and shoved Jamal hard in the chest. I could not hear her screaming through the thick, soundproof glass, but her furious body language translated perfectly. She was pointing wildly at the locked club doors, then violently pointing at his empty pockets. She was entirely blaming him for the public humiliation, the repossessed Porsche, and the total evaporation of the wealth she had married him to secure. Jamal threw his hands up in the air, shouting frantically back at her. Vivian clutched her temples, sobbing dramatically on the curb, while Calvin stared blankly down at the asphalt, clutching his eviction papers, like a shield that could no longer protect him. They were turning on each other exactly as parasites do when the host body finally cuts off the food supply. I turned my back on the pathetic scene playing out on the sidewalk. I looked out over the crowded dance floor of my club. Hundreds of stunned patrons were staring up at me, waiting to see what the new undisputed owner would do next. The heavy silence in the room was electric, pulsing with anticipation. I picked up the silver microphone one last time. "I apologize for the brief interruption to your evening," I announced, projecting absolute unwavering hospitality and total control. "The previous management team has been permanently relieved of their duties due to gross financial misconduct and insolvency. But the Onyx Room is officially open for business, and tonight we celebrate a true restoration of cultural legacy." I looked over at the young resident DJ, who was watching me with wide, deeply respectful eyes. "Turn the music back up," I commanded, "and tell the bartenders that the next hour of top-shelf service is completely on the house. Welcome to the new era." The DJ immediately slammed the fader up. A heavy, triumphant bass line dropped, vibrating right through the floorboards and shaking the crystal chandeliers. The crowd erupted into a massive, deafening cheer. Waitstaff immediately rushed back to the floor carrying fresh bottles with lit sparklers. The strobe lights flared back to life, casting a golden glow over the packed room. The energy in the club shifted instantly from tense shock to absolute euphoric celebration. I handed the microphone back to the DJ and stepped down from the booth. I walked through my club no longer an invisible crisis manager or an unappreciated daughter. I was the landlord. I was the architect of my own empire and the architect of their ruin. Saturday morning sunlight filtered through the heavy plantation shutters of the executive office at the Onyx Room. I sat behind the massive mahogany desk that had served as my father's throne for the last 3 decades. The leather chair still held the faint scent of his expensive cologne, but the space was entirely mine now. I ran my hand over the polished wood, feeling the deep historical grain of my grandfather's legacy finally resting in the right hands. The chaotic pulsing energy of last night's eviction had settled into a quiet, absolute victory. The club was spotless, the floors gleaming, and the staff had arrived for their morning shifts with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing their paychecks were backed by Vanguard Holdings instead of bounced by Calvin. The heavy wooden door swung open and Elijah walked in carrying 2 matte black folders and a fresh cup of black coffee. He set the coffee down in front of me and took the seat across the desk, looking dangerously satisfied. "Atlanta is a very small town when you are at the top," Elijah said, opening the first folder. "And word travels at the speed of light when you fall to the bottom. Your family is currently in the middle of a catastrophic meltdown." I took a sip of the hot coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me. "Tell me everything," I said. Elijah flipped to the first page of his report. "It seems the unbreakable bond of your brother's marriage lasted exactly 14 hours without your bank account funding it. Chloe filed for divorce at 11:15 this morning. She cited gross financial insolvency and irreconcilable differences in the emergency filing." I leaned back in my chair, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. Chloe had spent years terrorizing me with her fake, sweet microaggressions, pretending her marriage to Jamal was the pinnacle of black and white high society blending. She loved the idea of being the matriarch of a wealthy black empire, right up until the moment she realized she was married to a broke man-child with a repossessed Porsche. According to my sources at the courthouse, Elijah continued, she packed 3 designer suitcases before dawn and took an Uber directly to her parents' house in Alpharetta. She completely cleared out whatever pennies were left in their joint checking account and left Jamal standing in the driveway of their leased townhouse. She is already spinning a narrative to her country club friends, claiming Jamal hid his massive debts from her and that she is the true victim of a fraudulent marriage. Jamal was currently experiencing the brutal reality of conditional love. He had spent his entire life being coddled by our parents, shielded from consequence, and handed opportunities he never had to work for. He thought Chloe loved him for his charm and his status. Now he was sitting alone in a rented house he could no longer afford, realizing his trophy wife viewed him solely as a failed investment. He had absolutely no crisis management skills because I was the one who had always fixed his messes. Now there was no safety net to catch him and no one to blame but himself. He was finally being forced to look in the mirror and acknowledge his own profound incompetence. "And what about the great patriarch?" I asked, turning my attention back to Elijah. "How is Calvin handling his eviction from the high society he cares so much about?" Elijah shook his head, sliding the second folder across the desk. "He is radioactive, Zuri. Calvin has spent the entire morning desperately dialing every single contact in his expansive Rolodex. He called the city councilmen, the real estate brokers, and the private equity lenders he used to golf with at the country club. He is begging for emergency bridge loans, trying to secure a new line of credit to challenge your ownership of the club." I picked up the folder, reviewing the list of names Elijah had compiled. These were men who had happily drank my father's premium bourbon just 24 hours ago. Every single one of them sent his calls straight to voicemail. Elijah stated, his tone flat and professional. The men who did answer politely informed him that they do not lend capital to individuals under active investigation for embezzlement. Your public presentation of the financial receipts last night completely destroyed his credibility. Atlanta's elite will tolerate a lot of things, but they do not tolerate being made to look foolish by associating with a fraud. He has absolutely zero financial leverage. No bank will touch him. No private lender will take his calls. He is entirely isolated. My father had built his entire identity around the perception of power. He believed his charisma and his tailored suits could charm any banker into handing over a blank check. He thought his legacy name made him untouchable. But wealth in this city is a ruthless game. The moment the other players realized Calvin was operating with stolen money, he was permanently expelled from the table. He was currently sitting in whatever temporary housing he and my mother had managed to secure, staring at a silent phone, realizing that his entire network was completely transactional. His golfing buddies did not actually care about him. They cared about the free VIP booths and the premium liquor he provided on my dime. Now that the dime was gone, so were his friends. I closed the folders and handed them back to Elijah. Keep monitoring their legal filings, I instructed. If Calvin tries to submit any fraudulent claims against Vanguard Holdings, I want countersuits drafted and ready to file within the hour. Lock down the perimeter around this building. I do not want any unauthorized access by anyone sharing my last name. Ensure that the security team understands that Calvin and Jamal are considered hostile trespassers if they step foot on this property. Elijah nodded, gathering his documents and sliding them back into his briefcase. The transition is secure, Zuri. The Onyx Room is fully operational and the staff is completely loyal to you. They are just relieved to finally have competent management paying their wages. You should head back to your PR firm. You have your own empire to run. I left the club early that afternoon, trading the historic velvet booths for the sleek glass and steel environment of my corporate public relations office in Midtown. I drove through the bustling Atlanta traffic feeling an immense sense of clarity. I walked through the double doors of my firm, absorbing the vibrant, focused energy of my own team. My staff was busy handling multi-million-dollar accounts, securing press for major tech clients, and managing real crises for people who actually paid my invoices. I stepped into my corner office and sat down at my expansive glass desk, ready to dive back into the work that actually fueled my soul. For a brief moment, I thought the dust had finally settled. I thought my family had taken their crushing defeat and retreated into the shadows to lick their wounds. I underestimated my mother's sheer audacity and her absolute refusal to accept reality. I had barely opened my laptop when the heavy glass door to my office suddenly slammed open, hitting the rubber wall stop with a violent crack. I looked up, instantly annoyed by the breach in protocol. My executive assistant stood in the doorway looking frantic and deeply apologetic. She had been physically shoved aside. Standing right behind her, breathing heavily and looking completely unhinged, was my mother. Vivian had entirely bypassed the lobby security desk, ignoring the building's strict access protocols and pushing past the receptionists. Her usually flawless hair was disheveled, and her designer trench coat was wrinkled and haphazardly buttoned. The composed, arrogant socialite who had demanded I empty my retirement account just a few days ago was completely gone. She marched directly into my private office, slamming her expensive handbag down onto the surface of my glass desk. "We are going to have a private meeting right now," Zuri Vivian demanded, her voice shaking with a desperate, frantic energy. "And you are going to listen to every single word I have to say." I did not flinch or look up from my laptop immediately. I simply raised a single finger, signaling my assistant to step back and close the heavy glass door behind her. The lock clicked into place, sealing my mother and me inside the soundproof walls of my corporate sanctuary. I slowly closed my laptop and folded my hands on the pristine surface of my desk. I looked at the woman standing before me. Vivian had spent my entire life presenting herself as the untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society. She was a woman who navigated charity galas and country club luncheons with effortless superiority. But the woman standing in my office today was a completely shattered illusion. Her designer trench coat was misaligned, and the heavy gold bracelets on her wrists clanked with a frantic, nervous energy. "Take a seat, mother," I said, my voice entirely devoid of warmth. "You have exactly 5 minutes of my time before my next client call." Vivian sank into the leather guest chair across from me. The fight seemed to physically drain out of her the moment she sat down. She reached out, placing both her hands flat on my desk, leaning forward with wide, pleading eyes. "Zuri, please," she began, her voice dropping its usual demanding edge, replacing it with a soft, trembling vibration. "We need to talk about everything that has happened. There have been so many terrible misunderstandings between us. Your father and I, we were under so much stress with the club. We made mistakes, and I am woman enough to admit that to my daughter." I sat perfectly still, letting her weave her web of strategic vulnerability. "We are losing the house, Zuri," she cried, her voice breaking into a genuine sob. "The bank issued the foreclosure notices this morning. Calvin cannot get a loan from anyone in the city. His accounts are frozen and the creditors are calling the house non-stop. Jamal is completely useless and hiding in a rented room. We have absolutely nothing left. You made your point on Friday night. You proved how powerful you are. But you cannot let your own parents get thrown out onto the street." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a tissue, dabbing carefully at the corners of her eyes. "I know you are angry," Vivian continued, sniffing softly. "But I am asking you to find it in your heart to help us. We do not need the club back. We just need a small monthly stipend, just a modest allowance to keep the Buckhead estate and cover our basic living expenses. You have so much wealth, Zuri. A few $1,000s a month is nothing to you, but it would save our lives. We can start over. We can go to family therapy. We can be a real family again." I listened to her entire performance without interrupting. I watched the tears slide down her cheeks, and I realized with absolute clarity that she was not crying because she regretted abusing me. She was crying because she had lost her limitless checking account. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a single sheet of heavy legal paper. I placed it face down on the glass. "A misunderstanding," I repeated, letting the word hang in the cold air of my office. "You are calling the systematic financial and emotional abuse of your daughter a misunderstanding." Vivian opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hands, silencing her instantly. "Do not interrupt me," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. "Let us break down exactly what you misunderstood, Mother. Did you misunderstand that Calvin was using my social security number to buy Jamal a luxury sports car? Or did you just happily ride in the passenger seat? Did you misunderstand that the club was bankrupt? Or did you actively encourage Dad to siphon $750,000 from the angel investor to fund your lifestyle?" Vivian flinched, pulling her hands back into her lap. "Zuri, I did not know where the money was coming from. I swear to you. Do not lie in my office," I snapped, leaning forward. "I have the forensic ledgers, Mother. I saw the direct wire transfers from Vanguard Holdings into your personal checking account. I know exactly how many first-class flights to Monaco you booked using the money I bled to keep my grandfather's legacy alive. I know exactly how many custom designer bags you bought while I was working 80-hour weeks sitting behind this desk." She stared at me, her breath hitching in her throat as she realized the full extent of my knowledge. "But the absolute worst part," I continued, leaning back in my chair, "is that you took my hard-earned money and you handed it directly to Chloe. You paid a monthly retainer to a mediocre white woman who spent every Sunday dinner making racist microaggressions about my hair and my skin tone. You subsidized her arrogance with my sacrifice. You sat back and watched her tear me down while you quietly cashed my checks." "I am your mother," Vivian sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I was just trying to keep the family together. I was trying to protect Jamal." "And who was protecting me?" I asked, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "Who was protecting the dark-skinned daughter who actually put in the work while you enabled a golden child who crashed every opportunity he was given? You did not protect Jamal, Mother. You crippled him. You taught him that he could fail endlessly and someone else would always pay the bill. You taught him that women exist strictly to clean up his messes. Now Chloe has filed for divorce, and Jamal is hiding in a rented room because he has zero survival skills. You did that to him. Vivian looked up at me, her face twisted in a mixture of deep shame and lingering entitlement. We are blood, Zuri, she pleaded, reaching across the desk again. You cannot abandon us. You cannot just leave us with nothing. I picked up the legal document I had placed on my desk and slid it smoothly across the glass until it bumped against her designer handbag. I am not abandoning you, I said, my tone entirely analytical and devoid of pity. I am simply matching your energy. Last week you stood in a restaurant and demanded I empty my retirement accounts to save your son. You told me I had no legacy and that I should be honored to support my brother. You made your bed with Jamal. Now you get to sleep in it. Vivian looked down at the document. What is this? She whispered, her voice shaking. It is a formal cease and desist order, I explained, watching her eyes widen in horror. It legally prohibits you, Calvin and Jamal, from contacting me, my firm, or any of my subsidiaries ever again. It prohibits you from stepping foot within 500 feet of the Onyx Room or this office building. If you attempt to call me, email me, or show up at my properties, my security team will have you arrested for criminal trespassing and harassment. You are giving your own mother a restraining order. Vivian gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. I am giving a highly toxic liability a legal boundary, I corrected her. You wanted me to be the crisis manager, mother. Well, this is how I manage a crisis. I eliminate the threat. Vivian stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. She searched my face, looking for any trace of the desperate, eager to please daughter she had controlled for 3 decades. She looked for a crack in my armor, a flicker of guilt, a drop of hesitation. She found absolutely nothing but solid, impenetrable titanium. The realization finally hit her with the crushing force of a physical blow. She had no leverage left. She could not shame me into submission, and she could not manipulate my empathy, because I no longer had any empathy left for her. Her golden child was broke, her husband was a social pariah, and her daughter was a multi-millionaire who had permanently locked the vault. Vivian slowly stood up from the leather guest chair. She picked up the cease and desist order with trembling fingers, folding it and sliding it into her expensive handbag. She did not say another word. She turned around and walked toward the heavy glass door, her shoulders slumped, her head bowed, and her entire world completely demolished. I watched my mother walk out of my office and out of my life. As the heavy glass door clicked shut behind her, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I opened my contact list, navigated to the family group thread, and pressed the block button, permanently severing the digital connection to my past. The phone screen went dark, and the silence in my office felt like pure, unfiltered peace. The next 6 months were a masterclass in aggressive renovation and absolute corporate restructuring. I did not just clean the Onyx Room. I surgically extracted every single trace of my father from the premises. Calvin had spent the last decade covering up my grandfather's original vision with tacky gold-trimmed cheap velvet and a desperately dated aesthetic that screamed of new money and security. I hired the best commercial contractors in Atlanta and ordered them to rip the entire interior down to the studs. We uncovered the original exposed brick from the 1960s. We restored the authentic mahogany bars and polished the brass fixtures until they gleamed. I commissioned massive original paintings from emerging Black artists across the city, transforming the dark walls into a vibrant museum of true cultural excellence. This was no longer just a nightclub operating on borrowed time. It was a historical institution reborn. I integrated the venue directly into the daily operations of my public relations firm. We stopped relying on unreliable club promoters and predatory street loans to fill the rooms. Instead, I leveraged my corporate Rolodex. We hosted exclusive real estate galas for Maxine and her high-net-worth investors. We booked private listening parties for Grammy-winning artists who appreciated the strict privacy protocols I instituted. We held high-ticket fundraisers for the mayor and local politicians. The revenue did not just stabilize under my management, it skyrocketed to unprecedented heights. The Onyx Room quickly became the most profitable hospitality venue in the district entirely because I ran the operational budget with the exact same ruthless precision I used to destroy my family's lies. Atlanta is a brutally small town when you fall from grace. I never had to seek out information about the demise of my family because the city socialites were more than happy to deliver the gossip directly to me at networking luncheons. Calvin and Vivian could not outrun the financial avalanche I triggered that Friday night. With Vanguard Holdings officially seizing the club and permanently freezing their stolen income stream, they defaulted on the massive Buckhead estate. To avoid the absolute public humiliation of a highly publicized bank auction, they negotiated a desperate short sale. My parents were forced to pack up their custom designer wardrobes and move into a modest two-bedroom condo in a heavily congested suburb miles away from their former elite status. My mother lost her prestigious country club membership when her dues bounced for the third consecutive month. The wealthy women who used to hang on her every word now actively pretended not to see her at the grocery store. Her smear campaign against me was entirely forgotten, replaced by the undeniable reality of her own financial ruin. My brother Jamal suffered the steepest and most poetic fall of all. Without his luxury sports car, his fake executive title, and his wealthy wife to prop up his image, he was reduced to his actual market value, which was absolutely nothing. The divorce with Chloe was finalized rapidly and aggressively, leaving him drowning in legal fees he could not afford. I heard through a mutual business acquaintance that Jamal was currently working a mid-level regional sales job, hawking medical supplies out of a used economy sedan. The golden child who once confidently poured $2,500 bottles of wine on my tab was now cold-calling urgent care clinics just to make his monthly rent. He was stripped of his unearned pride and forced to live the exact ordinary life he used to mock. As I sat in my office reviewing the quarterly profit margins, the ultimate realization washed over me. I did not just take my money back from thieves, I bought my peace. The $750,000 my father embezzled was a heavy, steep price to pay, but it bought me the most valuable asset in the world. It bought me absolute permanent silence. I no longer flinched when my phone rang. I no longer shrank myself to make incompetent men feel tall. I no longer absorbed the emotional labor of a family that viewed my existence as an invoice. I am pulled from these quiet thoughts by the smooth resonant sound of a live jazz band warming up on the main stage. It is a packed Saturday night exactly 6 months since I executed the hostile takeover. I am sitting in the elevated VIP balcony overlooking the main floor of the Onyx Room. The lighting is perfectly balanced, casting a warm amber glow over the incredibly dressed crowd below. The air smells like expensive bourbon and fresh orchids. I am holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne, but I am not drinking alone. Elijah sits across from me, casually reviewing a highly lucrative contract for our next commercial property expansion. Maxine is hosting her executive real estate team at the best table on the main floor, periodically raising her glass in my direction to acknowledge another successful launch. I am surrounded by brilliant, fiercely loyal people who respect my intellect, who value my time, and who pay their own bills. I look down at the exact spot on the dance floor where Jamal dropped to his knees and begged me to save his pride. I look at the space where Vivian weaponized her tears and demanded my blind obedience. I take a slow sip of my champagne, feeling the crisp bubbles against my tongue. Family is not defined by shared DNA. Blood is simply a biological accident. True family is defined by mutual respect and unwavering support. My parents expected me to be the invisible workhorse pulling their heavy, lavish lives in the dark, while they paraded around in the spotlight taking all the credit. They demanded my endless labor but forcefully denied me a seat at the table. So I did not just take a seat, I bought the entire building and I shut them in the dark. True power is not about seeking validation from people who are fundamentally committed to misunderstanding your worth. You cannot force a toxic bloodline to see your value when their entire survival depends on keeping you beneath them. True power is about removing their access to your energy entirely. It is about building your empire so high and so remarkably strong that they cannot even afford the admission ticket to watch you win. Have you ever had to pull the plug on a toxic family member to protect your peace and your sanity? I want to hear how you reclaimed your power. Tell me your story in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and remember one very important rule. Never let anyone spend your hard-earned money to fund your own disrespect.